Show me your papers, both of you. Now. Excuse me? We're having lunch. I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked for your documentation. You speak pretty good English for someone who probably shouldn't be here. We were both born in California, sir. Sure you were, and I'm the Queen of England. Stand up, hands on the table. Now, we're not standing up. We're American citizens enjoying a meal. That's what they all say. Every single one of you has a story. But I've been doing this long enough to know when something doesn't add up. And you two don't add up. Sir, I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket and show you something. Don't you move. Don't you dare move. I'm reaching for my wallet. Inside, you'll find my California State Bar card, my federal court ID, and my driver's license. My name is Miguel Reyes. I'm an immigration attorney. This is my wife, Elena. She's also an immigration attorney. And right now you are making the biggest mistake of your career. At 1:23 p.m. inside a crowded restaurant in downtown San Diego, two American citizens were demanded to prove they belonged in their own country. The ICE agent who approached them saw brown skin, heard Spanish, and decided that was enough. What he didn't see were the 2 law degrees from Stanford and Harvard, the federal court credentials, the 17 years of combined experience defending immigrants, and the cell phone quietly recording every word he said. Within 48 hours, his career would be over. The lawsuit that followed would be the largest civil rights settlement in ICE history, and the reforms it triggered would change department policy nationwide. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Agent Derek Nolan had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for 11 years. In that time, he'd built a reputation that his supervisors chose to describe as aggressive but effective. His colleagues had other words for it, words they only used when he wasn't around. His personnel file told a story that should have ended his career years earlier. A 2017 complaint from a Guatemalan family he detained at a bus stop while they were on their way to church. The father was a legal permanent resident. The mother was a naturalized citizen. Their children were born in Los Angeles. Nolan held them for 3 hours before a supervisor forced him to release them. A 2018 incident involving a Filipino nurse he confronted in a hospital parking garage, demanding to see her work visa. She'd been an American citizen for 22 years. A 2020 grievance from a Native American man Nolan stopped while walking his dog, insisting he show proof of citizenship. The man's family had lived on that land for 11 generations. A 2022 complaint from a Korean restaurant owner, Nolan accused of running an illegal operation because, as the official report stated, the menu wasn't primarily in English. Each time the agency issued warnings. Each time they mandated online training modules that Nolan clicked through without reading. Each time they moved on, and each time Nolan learned the same lesson. He could get away with it. No one who mattered was watching. No one who mattered cared. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, Nolan was technically off duty. He'd finished his shift at 11 a.m. and stopped at Casa Martinez, a popular Mexican restaurant near the federal courthouse, for a late lunch. He was still carrying his badge. He always carried his badge. It made him feel powerful even when he wasn't on the clock. The restaurant was busy with the usual Tuesday crowd, lawyers from the courthouse, office workers on lunch break, a few tourists studying maps on their phones. Nolan took a seat at the bar, ordered a beer and scanned the room with the same suspicious gaze he used on patrol. That's when he noticed them. Corner booth. A man and a woman. Hispanic, well-dressed, speaking Spanish to each other, laughing comfortably. The man was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Nolan's monthly rent. The woman had a designer bag placed carefully beside her on the seat. Something about the scene bothered him. Not anything specific. Not anything he could articulate. Just a feeling. The kind of feeling he'd learned to trust over 11 years. The kind of feeling that had led to dozens of stops, dozens of detentions, and exactly 0 consequences for being wrong. He watched them for almost 15 minutes. Watched the way they talked, the way they smiled, the way they seemed so comfortable in a place where, in his mind, they didn't belong. Finally, he set down his beer and walked over. The man at the table was Miguel Reyes, 41 years old, third-generation American. His grandfather had immigrated from Mexico in 1952, worked the fields of Central California for 30 years, and saved every penny to send his children to school. Miguel's father became a teacher. Miguel became a lawyer. Stanford Law, class of 2008, top 10% of his class, offers from every major firm in the country. He turned them all down to open his own practice focused on immigration law. 17 years later, Reyes and Associates was one of the most respected immigration firms on the West Coast. Miguel had argued cases before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He'd testified before Congress on immigration policy reform. He'd been featured in Time magazine's list of the 100 most influential attorneys in America. Sitting across from him was his wife, Elena Reyes, 39. Her story was different, but led to the same place. Her parents were both doctors who immigrated legally from Mexico City in the 1970s. They'd faced discrimination their entire careers, worked twice as hard for half the recognition, and raised their daughter to be unstoppable. Harvard Law, class of 2010. Elena spent her first 5 years as a federal prosecutor, putting away human traffickers and drug cartels. Then she switched sides, not because she lost faith in the system, but because she wanted to fix it from a different angle. She joined her husband's firm and specialized in asylum cases, the hardest, most heartbreaking corner of immigration law. Together, they'd won cases that made national headlines. A mother separated from her children at the border, reunited after their 18-month legal battle. A family facing deportation to a country where they would certainly be killed, granted asylum on appeal. A community organizer wrongfully detained, released and compensated after they exposed misconduct in his case. They'd chosen Casa Martinez for lunch because it was 2 blocks from the federal courthouse, where they'd just won a landmark case. A family that had been fighting deportation for 7 years, generation spanning, was finally going to stay. The grandmother who'd started the journey wouldn't live to see it. She'd passed away the previous spring, but her daughter and grandchildren would remain in the country she dreamed of calling home. It was a good day, a rare day where the system had actually worked the way it was supposed to. Miguel had ordered champagne. Elena had laughed at his corny toast. For one afternoon, they weren't attorneys carrying the weight of impossible cases. They were just a couple celebrating a victory. Then Derek Nolan walked up to their table and everything changed. He didn't introduce himself, didn't show credentials, didn't explain why he was there. Just stood at the edge of their booth, looking down at them with an expression Miguel had seen 1,000 times before. The expression of someone who had already decided what they were looking at. You two. Papers. Now. Miguel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Slowly, deliberately, he set it down on his plate. Excuse me. Don't play dumb with me. Documentation. Both of you. Let's see it. Elena's hand moved smoothly under the table, reaching for her phone in her purse. She'd handled enough cases to recognize exactly what was happening, and she'd trained herself to respond without thinking. Her thumb found the recording app. 2 taps. The screen went dark, but a small red indicator confirmed it was capturing audio. She angled the phone against her purse, camera facing outward. Sir, can you identify yourself? Nolan reached for his belt and flashed his badge. The movement was practiced, quick, designed to intimidate rather than inform. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and I'm not asking again. Papers, now. Miguel kept his voice at the same level he used when hostile witnesses tried to rattle him in court. Calm, measured, giving nothing away. We're American citizens. We were both born in California. We're not required to carry documentation proving our citizenship. Nolan leaned closer, close enough that Miguel could smell the beer on his breath. Everyone's got a story. You people always do, every single time. But here's the thing. I decide who looks suspicious. I decide who gets questioned, and right now, looking at you two, something doesn't add up. You people. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Elena adjusted her phone slightly, making sure the angle captured Nolan's face. You people, can you clarify what you mean by that, sir? Nolan smirked, oblivious to the trap being laid. I mean people who come here thinking they can blend in, people who take advantage of the system. You're speaking Spanish in a Mexican restaurant in a nice neighborhood. You're wearing clothes that cost more than most people make in a month. You fit a profile. And in my experience, when something looks too good to be true, It usually is. The restaurant had gone quiet. Conversations at nearby tables had stopped. A waiter stood frozen near the kitchen door, a tray of food balanced on his palm. The hostess had her hand on the phone at the front desk, unsure whether to call the police or stay out of it. A businessman 2 tables over had pulled out his phone and was recording openly now. He didn't even try to hide it. Miguel reached slowly toward his jacket pocket. Nolan's hand shot to his hip, hovering over something clipped to his belt. "Don't move. Don't you dare reach for anything. I'm reaching for my wallet, officer. Nothing else. Inside you'll find identification that proves exactly who I am. Keep your hands where I can see them." Miguel paused, hands raised slightly. "I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket with my right hand. I'm going to remove my wallet. I'm going to place it on this table. Is that acceptable?" Nolan hesitated, then nodded curtly. Slow. Miguel's movements were deliberate, almost theatrical. He pulled out a leather wallet and set it on the table between them. Then he opened it slowly, revealing its contents one by one. "This is my California driver's license. Miguel Antonio Reyes. Address in La Jolla. Born in San Diego, California." He pulled out another card. "This is my California State Bar card. License number 247891. Active and in good standing for 17 years. Another card. This is my federal court identification. Certified to practice before the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals and the United States Supreme Court." He looked up at Nolan. "My name is Miguel Reyes. I'm the senior partner at Reyes & Associates, one of the largest immigration law firms in California. I've argued cases before federal judges. I've testified before Congress. And I've spent my entire career defending people against exactly what you're doing right now." Nolan's expression flickered, the first crack in his armor. But he didn't back down. Cards can be faked. Doesn't prove anything. Elena spoke now, her voice carrying the same authority she used when delivering closing arguments. "I'm Elena Reyes, Harvard Law, class of 2010. Former federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. Current partner at Reyes & Associates. My credentials are in my purse, which I'm happy to show you. But first I want you to understand something." She leaned forward slightly. "This conversation is being recorded, not just by my phone, but by the security cameras in this restaurant. By the gentleman 2 tables over, who has been filming since you walked up. And by the body camera that I'm certain you're not wearing, because you're off duty and have no authority to conduct this stop." Nolan's jaw tightened. "I have the authority to question anyone I have reasonable suspicion about." "What reasonable suspicion?" Elena's voice was sharp now. "That we're speaking Spanish? That we're eating at a Mexican restaurant? That we don't look the way you think American citizens should look? None of that constitutes reasonable suspicion under any legal standard. And you know it." The restaurant was completely silent now. Every eye was on the corner booth. Miguel pulled out his phone. "Here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to call the ICE Office of Professional Responsibility. I'm going to report that Agent Derek Nolan, badge number visible on your ID, is conducting an unauthorized stop while off duty. That you demanded documentation from American citizens without reasonable suspicion. That you used language constituting national origin discrimination. And that you continued this harassment after being shown valid identification." He paused. "Or you can apologize and walk away right now. Those are your only 2 options." Nolan's face had turned a deep shade of red. The kind of red that comes from humiliation, from anger, from realizing that the power you thought you had is slipping away. But instead of backing down, he made the choice that would destroy his career. "I don't take orders from people like you." He reached for Miguel's arm. "Stand up, both of you. You're coming with me for further questioning." Miguel didn't move. "Take your hand off me." I said stand up, and I said, "Take your hand off me." You have no authority to detain us. You have no reasonable suspicion of any crime. You have no warrant. And in about 30 seconds you're going to have a very serious problem. As if on cue, the restaurant's front door opened. 2 men in suits walked in with the kind of purposeful stride that made everyone turn to look. Eleanor had sent a text message 3 minutes earlier, the moment Nolan flashed his badge. The men were colleagues from their firm who had been at the courthouse 2 blocks away, finishing paperwork on the case they'd just won. Carlos Vega was first through the door, 6'3", former Marine, currently one of the most aggressive immigration litigators in the state. Behind him was David Park, smaller, quieter, and already on his phone. Carlos crossed the restaurant in 4 long strides and stopped directly beside the booth. "Agent Nolan, I'm Carlos Vega, attorney at law. I'm a witness to this interaction. The gentleman on the phone behind me is currently speaking with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. I'd recommend you stop talking immediately and remove your hand from my colleague." Nolan looked around the restaurant, the phones recording from every angle, the witnesses watching in stunned silence, the attorneys multiplying around him, the walls closing in. "This is a misunderstanding." "No." Eleanor's voice was ice. "This is a federal civil rights violation. It's harassment based on national origin. It's unlawful detention. It's abuse of authority. And every single second of it is documented." She stood up slowly, her phone still recording. "You wanted to see our papers? Here's what you should know about us. Between the two of us, we've won over 300 immigration cases. We've exposed misconduct by ICE agents in federal court 17 times. We've gotten 6 agents fired, 3 supervisors demoted, and 1 field office director reassigned." She stepped closer to Nolan. "You are now number 7. If you believe that knowing your rights is the most powerful weapon against injustice, share this story and let others know that abuse of power always has consequences." The aftermath unfolded faster than anyone expected. Within 2 hours of the restaurant incident, the video Elena recorded was in the hands of ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility. Carlos had sent it directly to contacts he'd developed over years of filing complaints against the agency. The civilian footage from the businessman's phone hit social media within the hour. Within 4 hours, Agent Derek Nolan was placed on administrative leave. His badge was confiscated. His service weapon was surrendered. He was escorted from the field office by 2 supervisors who refused to make eye contact with him. By 6 p.m. that evening, the story was on every local news channel in San Diego. By 9 p.m., it had gone national. By midnight, the video had 12 million views across platforms. The headlines wrote themselves. Immigration attorneys harassed by ICE agent for speaking Spanish. Decorated lawyers demanded to show papers at restaurant. Viral video shows off-duty ICE agent targeting Hispanic couple. But Miguel and Elena knew how these stories usually went. Viral outrage followed by quiet settlements, brief suspensions followed by reassignments, headlines that faded while the underlying problems remained. They weren't going to let that happen. The morning after the incident, they convened in their firm's conference room with 6 other attorneys, 2 paralegals, and a case strategy that had been building in their minds for years. "This isn't just about us," Miguel said to the room. "It's about every person this has happened to who didn't have law degrees, who didn't know their rights, who were too afraid to speak up because they thought no one would believe them." Elena pulled up a file on the conference room screen. "We've been tracking complaints against this specific agent for 3 years. Nolan's name has come up in our cases 4 times. Each time our clients described the same behavior, the same language, the same assumption that anyone who looks Hispanic must be illegal until proven otherwise." She clicked to the next slide. "But here's what makes this different. This time, the victims are us. This time, there's video. This time, there's no way to bury it." The formal complaint they filed with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General was 47 pages long. It documented not just the restaurant incident, but the pattern of behavior stretching back years. Every prior complaint against Nolan that had been dismissed. Every stop that matched the same profile. Every victim who had been too intimidated to push back. They tracked down the Filipino nurse from 2018. She agreed to provide a statement. They found the Native American man from 2020. He joined as a witness. The Korean restaurant owner from 2022 was hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation. But when he saw the video of Miguel and Elena, when he saw that someone was finally fighting back, he added his name to the complaint. The lawsuit was filed 1 week after the incident. $12 million. Civil rights violations under Section 1983. National origin discrimination under Title VI. Unlawful detention. abuse of authority, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The agency's lawyers reached out within 72 hours, offering $2 million to make it go away. Confidentiality agreement attached. No admission of wrongdoing. The standard playbook. Miguel's response was 3 words. See you in court. If you believe that silence only protects the people who abuse their power, share this story and let others know that the truth always finds a way out. The deposition of Agent Derek Nolan took place 6 weeks after the restaurant incident. It lasted 9 hours, over 2 days, and it destroyed whatever remained of his defense. Miguel conducted the questioning himself. He'd prepared for weeks, gathering every document, every complaint, every report from Nolan's 11 years with ICE. The questions started simply, almost friendly, establishing timelines and basic facts. Then they got harder. Agent Nolan, can you explain what specific behavior led you to approach my clients on the afternoon in question? Nolan shifted in his seat. His attorney whispered something. Nolan nodded. They appeared suspicious. Suspicious how, the way they were acting? And what specific actions did you observe that you considered suspicious? A long pause. They were speaking Spanish. Miguel let the answer hang in the air. Speaking Spanish. In a Mexican restaurant, in San Diego, California, which has a Hispanic population of over 30%. That was suspicious to you, Nolan's attorney objected. Miguel rephrased. Were they doing anything else that you considered suspicious? Another pause. Longer this time. They just looked like they didn't belong. Didn't belong. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Nolan's face was red now. I've been doing this job for 11 years. You develop instincts. Miguel nodded slowly. Let's talk about those instincts. He pulled out a folder. In the past 5 years, you've conducted approximately 400 discretionary stops. Do you know what percentage of those stops involved Hispanic individuals? Nolan shook his head. I don't track that. I do. Miguel placed a document on the table. 91%. 364 of your 400 discretionary stops involved individuals you identified as Hispanic. Of those 364 stops, do you know how many resulted in legitimate immigration enforcement action? Nolan said nothing. 14, 3.8%. The other 96% were American citizens, legal permanent residents, visa holders, or tourists. All detained, all questioned, all humiliated because of your instincts. The room was silent. Nolan's attorney called for a break. When they returned, Miguel continued for another 4 hours, methodically walking through every prior complaint, every pattern of behavior, every moment where Nolan could have stopped and chose not to. By the end of the second day, Nolan looked like a man who had aged 10 years. The confidence was gone. The smirk had disappeared hours ago. All that remained was the slow realization that everything he'd gotten away with for 11 years was finally catching up. The internal investigation concluded 3 weeks after the deposition. The findings were devastating. Agent Derek Nolan had engaged in a pattern of discriminatory enforcement that violated department policy, federal civil rights law, and basic standards of professional conduct. The investigation found credible evidence of national origin discrimination in at least 23 separate incidents. It found that prior complaints had been improperly dismissed or inadequately investigated. It found that supervisors had failed to address documented patterns of misconduct. Nolan was terminated effective immediately, not suspended, not allowed to resign, fired for cause. His credentials were permanently revoked. His name was entered into a national database of law enforcement officers removed for civil rights violations. He would never work in immigration enforcement again. He would never work in any law enforcement capacity again. 3 supervisors were demoted for their failure to address prior complaints. The field office director was reassigned pending further review. The agency announced a comprehensive audit of complaint procedures nationwide. But Miguel and Elena weren't finished. Eleanor was invited to testify before the House Judiciary Committee 3 months after the incident. She sat before the panel in a packed hearing room, cameras broadcasting her words to millions. She didn't read from prepared remarks. She spoke directly, personally, devastatingly. I've spent my career in courtrooms, she said. I've prosecuted criminals and defended the innocent. I've seen the best and worst of our justice system. But nothing prepared me for being treated like a criminal in my own country because of the color of my skin and the language I speak." She paused. "What happened to me and my husband happens every day in this country, to families at bus stops, to workers in parking lots, to children in schoolyards, people who are stopped, questioned, detained, humiliated, not because of anything they've done, but because of how they look." She held up a folder. "I have here 47 documented cases from our firm alone where American citizens were wrongfully detained by immigration enforcement. 47 people who had to prove they belonged in their own country. 47 people whose lives were disrupted, whose dignity was violated, whose faith in the system was shattered." She set the folder down. "This is not about one bad agent. This is about a system that allows, enables, and sometimes encourages this behavior. A system where complaints disappear into bureaucratic black holes, where patterns of abuse go unaddressed for years, where the burden of proof falls on the victims rather than the perpetrators." She looked directly into the camera. "We have an opportunity to change that. Not with words, with action, with mandatory body cameras and real accountability, with transparent complaint processes and independent oversight, with training that actually changes behavior, not just checks a box." She leaned forward. "The question is whether we have the courage to do it." The settlement was reached 11 months after the restaurant incident. $12 million, the full amount demanded. No confidentiality agreement, no limitations on what Miguel and Elena could say publicly, and a written acknowledgement from the agency that Agent Nolan's conduct violated federal civil rights law. It was the largest individual civil rights settlement in ICE history, but true to their word, it was never about the money. They held a press conference the day the settlement was finalized. The room was packed with reporters, advocates, and supporters who had followed the case from the beginning. Elena spoke first. "1 year ago, we were sitting in a restaurant celebrating a victory for one of our clients, a family that had spent 7 years fighting to stay together in this country. We ordered champagne. We laughed. We spoke Spanish, the language of our grandparents, the language of our childhood, the language of our hearts." She paused. "And a man with a badge walked up to our table and demanded to know what right we had to be there." Miguel stepped to the microphone. "We had every right. We have every right. And so does every other person in this country, regardless of what language they speak, what food they eat, what clothes they wear, or what color their skin is." He looked directly into the cameras. "Today, we're announcing how we will use this settlement. Not for ourselves, for the community that made us who we are," Elena continued. $4 million will fund free legal representation for immigrants facing deportation who cannot afford attorneys. $3 million will support Know Your Rights campaigns in communities targeted by discriminatory enforcement. $2 million will establish a fellowship program to train the next generation of civil rights lawyers. And $3 million will create a rapid response legal fund for people detained without cause," Miguel added. "Every penny of this settlement will go toward making sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else without consequences." A reporter raised her hand. "What about Agent Nolan? Any message for him?" Miguel thought for a moment. He spent 11 years believing he was untouchable, believing that his badge gave him the right to decide who belonged in this country based on how they looked, believing that no one would ever hold him accountable. He was wrong. Elena spoke the final words. "To anyone watching who has experienced what we experienced, you are not alone, you have rights, there are people who will fight for you. Document everything, speak up when you can, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in your own country." Derek Nolan watched the press conference from his mother's basement in Arizona. He'd moved there 3 months earlier, after losing his apartment, after being rejected from every job he applied for, after discovering that his name had become synonymous with exactly the kind of abuse he once thought he could commit without consequence. His lawyer had stopped returning his calls. His union had distanced itself from his case. Former colleagues who once laughed at his stories over beers now pretended they didn't know him. He saw the number on the screen. $12 million for one afternoon. for one moment of arrogance, for words he'd said 100 times before without any consequence. He thought about all the people he'd stopped over the years, all the papers he'd demanded, all the lives he'd disrupted for a few moments of feeling powerful. He wondered, for the first time, what their lives were like. Whether they'd gone home and hugged their children tighter, whether they'd cried in their cars after driving away, whether they still flinched when they saw an ice jacket on the street. He wondered if any of them were watching right now. A year later, Miguel and Elena returned to Casa Martinez. Same corner booth, same Tuesday afternoon. The owner, who had testified as a witness in their case, met them at the door with a bottle of champagne and tears in her eyes. The restaurant had changed, not dramatically but meaningfully. There was a small plaque near the entrance now, bronze lettering on polished wood. It read, "Know your rights. You belong here." Underneath, in smaller text, were phone numbers for immigration legal aid services. The owner explained that she'd installed it the week after the settlement was announced, that other restaurants in the neighborhood had done the same, that it had become something of a movement in San Diego, these small plaques appearing in businesses across the city. "You started something," she said. Miguel shook his head. "We just reminded people of something they already knew, that this country belongs to all of us, not just the people who get to decide who looks American enough." They sat down in their booth, the same seats, the same view of the restaurant, the same menu they'd been looking at a year ago when everything changed. Helena ordered in Spanish, loudly, deliberately. The waiter, a young man who hadn't been working there during the incident, smiled and responded in Spanish just as naturally. No one stared, no one interrupted, no one demanded to see their papers. Miguel raised his glass. To the next case. Elena clinked her glass against his. To the next fight. They drank. They laughed. They spoke the language of their grandparents without apology. Outside the window, the sun was setting over San Diego. The courthouse where they'd won so many battles was visible in the distance. The street where they'd built their practice. The city where they'd raised their family. The country they'd spent their careers trying to make better. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. There would always be another Agent Nolan, another demand for papers, another moment where someone decided that the color of your skin or the language you spoke made you suspicious. But there would also always be people willing to fight back. People with law degrees and people without them. People with cameras and people with courage. People who refused to accept that some Americans were more American than others. That was the real victory, not the settlement, not the termination, not even the policy changes. The real victory was the reminder that the system could be challenged, that power could be held accountable. That one afternoon in a restaurant could change not just 2 lives, but thousands. Miguel looked at his wife across the table. "Think we made a difference?" Elena smiled, the same smile that had won over juries and congressional committees and one very stubborn man who'd asked her to marry him 15 years ago. "I think we reminded people that the law belongs to everyone, not just the people enforcing it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "And I think we're just getting started. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity in their own country, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this need to be told, and people like Agent Nolan need to know that the world is watching. See you in the next one.